I guess I don't need to tell people in this audience that people all over this country are being lied to every day. And it's not just by the likes of Donald Trump, who you know will say anything to get votes. I think his biggest lie of all, actually, is that he's tries to make himself be considered as anti-establishment, because he knows that there's a lot of dissatisfaction and anger in the country. How somebody who's not the 1%, or the 1/10 of 1%, or even the 100th of the 1%, but more like the millionth of the 1%, can call himself anti-establishment is sort of beyond understanding, but he does. And we're accustomed to the right-wing media, how they will, push really just complete lies on almost every topic, whether it has to do with global warming or whether it's a political issue. But what about the supposedly neutral, more sophisticated media in this country? What about the New York Times, the Washington Post, and of course the commentators on the big networks? One thing to remember is that all these mouthpieces really are attached to the state, the capitalist state, in one way or another. And the super rich are the ones who are behind that state. So many of their ideas and of their training comes through organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie this, the Pew that, the Astor this. I mean, we've heard a lot about the Koch brothers, but what about all the others? They're all the ruling class too. Now, right now, all the media, the capitalist media that is, are absolutely in a frenzy about the bombings in Brussels. That's all they're focusing on. Whether they're liberal or center or right-wing, what are they saying to the people? They're saying, first of all, they're grabbing their attention with it, and they're saying, this is shocking. This is incomprehensible. How could this thing happen? What kind of fiends must this be for this to happen? And of course, they also focus on strengthening the capitalist state apparatus, the so-called security apparatus, and the tightening up on the borders. And they say, the government has to be given more access to cell phones and et cetera. But the lie isn't just what they do say, it's what they don't say. Because when you read about what happened in Brussels, you can scour the papers or the airwaves, and you hardly hear a mention of the wars that have been going on for almost 3 decades now in the Middle East and Northern Africa and even the east coast of Africa. They just don't want to make the connection at all. Well, let's remember what some of the things are that they're not reminding anybody of. Look at all the atrocities that have been carried out by the US and NATO. I don't even have to explain them. I can just mention their names. Abu Ghraib, waterboarding, other forms of torture, stress positions, sleeplessness, Guantanamo, the drones, bombing somebody in Iowa or something like that, pushes a button and something is destroyed somewhere in the Middle East. A hospital, a shopping center, a wedding party, whatever. Push a button, that's it. This has been going on for decades, every day, not once in a great while, day after day, week after week, month after month. there has been a war that the imperialists are waging against the peoples of the Middle East and Libya and Somalia now too. And of course, let's name them: Iraq, Yemen, Libya, so, Afghanistan, Syria, of course. Yes. So, you can, you know, this has been just going on and on and on. Now, I just wrote about an editorial for the paper where I started off with talking about something that the U.S. just admitted to. And that is that, yeah, they did bomb the hospital in Kunduz, and more than 40 people were killed. You don't see that being raised in the papers anymore. You see it once and it disappears. That was a hospital. You know, that's supposed to be sacred, yeah. They have a big red cross on the top of the roof of every hospital so that they won't get bombed. And when the bombs started to fall on that hospital in Kunduz, Doctors Without Borders, which is what is running the hospital, they know how to communicate directly to the U.S. military command. And they called them and they said, "You're bombing our hospital. We've given you the coordinates. You know, don't stop the bombing. It's a big mistake." And you know what happened? The bombs kept falling for hours until, you know, more than 40 people have been killed and 100 people or so injured more. But that has not been splashed all over the papers and TV. No, what they talk about all the time is that in Brussels, just as in Paris before that, and in San Bernardino before that, and in the Marathon bombing, and in the Trade Center bombing, that these are all innocent civilians. Now, wasn't it innocent civilians in the hospital in Kunduz? Isn't it innocent civilians in Beirut? Innocent civilians in Libya? Innocent civilians in Somalia? But no, they want to try and analyze the motives behind the people who do it. Like, it's so incomprehensible. Well, why would they do a thing like this? Do they ever try to look into the motivation behind the U.S. generals and the NATO generals who give these orders? Or the pilots that carry them out? Do they ever say, how can they do these things? No. It's supposed to be, no one can question the right of the Pentagon or of NATO to send bombers and warships and APCs and drones to wherever they want to kill people. That's what they're for, you know, to kill people, not for anything else. They talk about for peace. Yes, and they call them peacekeepers, right? So what gives them the right to invade? What gives them the right? Give them the right for shock and awe, for destroying city after city, Tripoli, Benghazi, Baghdad, Kabul, Aleppo, to loot, yes, Abuja, to loot. I can't even mention them all, you know, you just, and then to loot and destroy the ancient cultural sites and the museums, as they did so horribly in Iraq, you know. To destroy houses. Who gives them the right to do this? To destroy apartment buildings, power stations, airports, to destroy. But do the people, well, you know, they have the right. They're the imperialists. They have the right. They get a UN thing to say they have the right, or they get something else to say they have a right. But the really thing is, might makes right. That's what's really behind their motivation. Now, do the people here know what's been happening? Probably not very many. You know, some soldiers come back from these wars, but they can't talk about it. And it isn't just that they so traumatized that they can't talk about it. They can't talk about it. Look at what's happened to that guy Bergdahl. You know, he's facing life in the brig. If he says what he probably believes, which was that the war sucks, I want to get out of here, I didn't want any part of it. But if he says that, he goes to the brig for desertion. They can't talk about these things. There's no declaration of war anymore. They don't even bother with that, even though the Constitution says you have to have it. They just do it. And they call it regime change. What a euphemism for war. But you see, it's a war. And in wars, people die. Lots of innocent people die. Every war. That happens. That's what wars are. Now today, you know, the world is very connected. If you or someone in your family comes from one of these countries that has been invaded and destroyed and causing millions to be leaving, trying to get away from the destruction, if you have friends there, you pay attention. Most of the people in the United States may not be paying attention. But if you come from there, you pay attention. And it doesn't matter if you live in the US, or if you live in Britain, or if you live in France, or in Belgium, whatever. You pay attention. You know, you hear about the horrors going on. Sometimes from, you know, your own relatives who have seen it happen to them or to their close friends. And you hear about it and every day you think about it. You think about this war that's going on, where most people here, they're not thinking about it. But if you come from over there, or if you share a religion of the people over there, you may be thinking about it all the time. And eventually, as this has gone on, year after year after year, you feel it's a war against Muslims. And your anguish can turn into hatred, and can even cause you to take action. Action in which you know you are going to lose your life. Now think of that. You know how many American generals have lost their lives in military action in the last 50 years? Well, there was one general who got killed in Afghanistan. And there were one or two who got killed in Vietnam. And that's it. You have to go back, really, I think, to World War II. I don't think any generals, I'm not sure. No, I don't think any U.S. generals got killed in Korea. They got captured, but they didn't get killed. So, you know, and this goes for the whole top echelons of the military, right? They don't take it. It's the ones who go into war, especially very young, not knowing what the heck it's all about, but filled with all kinds of false ideas that have been part of this culture, this militaristic culture in which we live, where you can't look at a list of the movies on Netflix or Amazon without seeing, well, like 2/3 of them are all about going out and killing people. Yes. It's a militaristic culture we're in, right? Now, Brussels. What's Brussels like? It's a rich European city. It's the headquarters of NATO is there. The headquarters of the European Union is there. I've been there. It's a very bourgeois city. It's prosperous, right? Imagine how somebody who's living in that area feels when they think NATO headquarters is right there, and all the people that I love and care for are dying in the Middle East, and NATO is doing it. Just think about it for a little bit. You don't have to agree with the ideology. Just think of how they feel, right? Think of how they feel. You know, this is the 100th anniversary, right now, this month, next month, of Lenin writing the book called Imperialism. His famous book that he wrote during World War I in 1916 about how capitalism had reached a new stage with the domination of finance capital, or the integration, actually, of finance capital with industrial capital. And that what it had done was meant that you didn't have to be a colonizer anymore. You didn't have to be a colonial power. You could oppress people around the world through the financial system, through capital itself. And he showed that it wasn't good enough to understand our struggle in the modern era as just one, well, we're for the workers against the bosses. We are. We're for the workers against the bosses, 195%, 1,000%. But it's more than that now. It's oppressed nations fighting against oppressor nations, and the imperialists are the oppressor nations. Just as people who came from other classes in society than the workers, like Marx, Engels, Lenin, Fidel, Mao, they all needed to understand the workers, right? They had to understand the role of the working class. And those living in imperialist countries have to try to understand the feelings of those who are nationally oppressed. Whether they are nationally oppressed within the imperialist country itself, like the oppressed black and brown and indigenous people here, or whether they are living in countries that have become the target for imperialist expansion. Now, ever since there was colonialism and imperialism, there has been resistance from people who have been, whose countries or territories are being taken over. Sometimes the leaders are progressive in our sense of the word, but not always. Sometimes the struggle and the conditions of the struggle haven't brought to the fore a progressive leadership. During before World War II, I think it was in the 30s, when Italian fascism represented the imperialist state, Mussolini tried to take over Ethiopia, the one country in Africa that had not been colonized. And Haile Selassie was an emperor, and he was the head of state. And he was an emperor, and there was virtually serfdom in Ethiopia. And a lot of progressives in the West thought, well, we can't take sides in this, because he's not progressive. But he represented an oppressed people, and it was the duty of all anti-imperialists to support Ethiopia in their struggle to resist Italian imperialism under Mussolini. So we have to keep that in mind when we look at the struggle and what's going on now. Okay, I'm getting ready to wind down here. We can't demand what I don't like even use this word, but you'll understand what I mean. We can't demand political correctness when oppressed people are fighting back. That's what I'm saying. Oppressed people are fighting back. The imperialists had a whole plan to eliminate the progressive liberation movements around the world, especially after World War II, after they sort of cleared the air between themselves and they could, kind of unite against the oppressed of the world. So take a country like Afghanistan. There was a progressive development in Afghanistan in which there was a revolution. And it was led by progressives. It was led by leftists. The U.S. did everything they could to destroy that revolution. That was way back in the 70s and 80s. And in country after country, they went after any force that could oppose the imperialists who want to dominate that very strategic, oil-rich part of the world. They want to dominate the whole thing. They want to dominate it, be able to lock it up. They went after Nasser. He was no good, you know. Saddam Hussein was no good. Mossadegh in Iran, they overthrew him even earlier. Whether they were bourgeois or whether they were more to the left, more progressive, the U.S. and the imperialists couldn't tolerate them. They got rid of Gaddafi. Gaddafi was another person who had come to power through a national revolution, a national liberation struggle. So what was left? What was left for the people who wanted to fight back? Well, we had a very interesting talk given here a couple weeks ago about Iran, explaining why it was that in Iran it was the clerics who finally were the ones who were able to hold Iran together against imperialism after the Iranian Revolution, and how a lot of the leftists, it was very hard for them to accept that. And the person who gave the talk was somebody who was involved in that very deeply. And it took him a lot of time to realize that while he didn't agree with the leaders of Afghanistan, the religious leaders of Afghanistan, they were resisting imperialism in their own way. Well, we don't have to agree with the ideology of oppressed people to understand that especially those people who are drawn to what the imperialists called terrorism, what they're trying to resist is the subjugation of their people by the West. And that's why they're willing to sacrifice their lives. And as I said before, generals don't sacrifice their lives. Officers don't willingly sacrifice their lives. And even the soldiers who go into war, they go thinking, hoping nothing's going to happen to them. That they'll come out, you know, and they'll have a little pension and things. Their life will be better than before they went in. But they're not thinking, I'm going in to die. They're not thinking that way. But in these actions, that's exactly what's happening. People are going in saying, I'm going to die, but I can't take it any longer. Now, you know, this is a hard thing to grasp, because I know that we see it like when something like that happens. We see it as being seized on immediately by the imperialists to strengthen their repressive institutions, and that they will try to make it to be to their benefit. And so there's a tendency to feel that, well, maybe the whole thing was manufactured by them in the first place. That was especially true at the time of the World Trade Center. There was lots of people who thought this couldn't have really been what they're saying it was. It had to have been a trap, you know, something created. And people still believe that. But you know, there was the World Trade Center. There was the Boston Marathon. There was San Bernardino. There was Paris. Now there's Brussels. We have to learn something from this. We have to understand something from this. That people who want to resist the imperialist takeover of their homelands are willing to sacrifice their lives in what they believe to be an effective tactic. We don't have to think it's a good tactic. We just have to understand where they're coming from, and that it's happening. And it's important to know that, because we're going to say to the people in this country when we talk to them, look, all this in upping the ante by the imperialists, more war, more repression, it's just going to make everything much worse. If you want the situation to get better, you've got to be for ending these horrible wars, because you have no comprehension of what these wars are like. The people who are in touch with their families back at home, they have some idea what this is all like, and they are so horrified by it that they're willing to become suicide bombers. You know, that's like, most people care, oh, they must be crazy, they must be out of their minds. No, the circumstances that they're up against are what's crazy and horrible. So, I say we have to continue to fight to expose the imperialists, be against these wars, try to end these wars. This empire is going down. It's going down very slowly, and there's all kinds of opposition to it. And it will take a long time, but it is going down. And the only thing that will provide a real future for the working class, whether it's here or in Europe or anywhere around the world, is socialist revolution. To get rid of this system that cannot shake free from militarism, attempting to control the whole world, attempting to take the riches of the whole world and bring them into their own coffers. We have to fight all this, and we have to understand how oppressed people coming from that part of the world feel. That's it. I just wanted to get back up just a little bit to Lenin, because, Lenin, there's like 24 volumes of what he wrote and spoke about. More than 24. But he, with all his, ability to discuss something thoroughly from every possible angle, what finally would come out of what he had to say would be very simple and easy to understand. And he wrote Imperialism during World War I. And he did it because, not just to make an analysis, but because he was orienting the working class movement in Europe about that war. What was the character of that war? It was an inter-imperialist war. The imperialists going at each other to try and make sure that they got the lion's share and not the other one. And that the position of the working class had to be against your own ruling class, whether you were in France or you were in Germany or you were in Russia. You should be against your own ruling class and be for their defeat. And turn your guns around against your own officers. Well, the one place where they actually did it was Russia. That's what happened. The Tsarist army disintegrated because the workers didn't want to fight for the Tsar. Now, what's the character of this war? See, this is not an inter-imperialist war. This is a war with all the imperialists, except for Japan, who, they keep out of the fray. All the imperialists together against oppressed people, oppressed nations. It's not a question of saying to the people in Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, turn your guns against your own ruling class. They're fighting the imperialists to get the imperialists off their back. Now, Jim's question was interesting because, you see, there's a lot of things that, God, so many things we wouldn't agree with in terms of what the a group like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or whoever stands for. We're for women's liberation. We're for lesbian gay liberation. We're for, we're for the working class. But we're against imperialism. That's what we've got to focus on. We want to see imperialism defeated. What does that mean? Get the imperialists out. Get them out. The only answer for the people of the Middle East is get the imperialists out. Then they can work it out, what kind of a society they want. But for us to say, oh, well, you should be this way or you should be that way, we just become their enemy. Yeah. They're not going to listen to that. And be us telling them, who are we? We're in an imperialist country. And it's the same thing for the people in France and the people in, all the imperialists that are ganging up against the people of the Middle East. So we have our own program. When it comes to tactics, yes, Jim says yes, of course. Lenin had a brother who tried to kill the Tsar. And he was executed, his younger brother. or his older brother, must have been his older brother. He tried, his brother, because the Tsarist oppression was so terrible, that there were all kinds of political, groups about what you should do about the Tsar, and his brother was like an anarchist, and he thought if he killed the Tsar, if he could succeed in killing the Tsar, that would end the problem, would be a big part of ending the problem. But Lenin said, no, that's not going to do it. They'll just get another Tsar. How do you get rid of Tsarism? How do you get rid of oppression of the peasants and the working class? You organize the masses. So, of course, that's what we're for. That's what we're for in fighting against U.S. imperialism in the United States. We're for organizing all the oppressed together with the working class to try and bring down this monster. And our tactics flow from that. But when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East, we don't tell them what to do. We just say, get the U.S. and Britain and France and all the others, get them out. Then they can decide. And there's plenty of good people who will fight for the right thing.